One of the genres of film that got me interested in filmmaking were martial arts movies, and the Ip Man films are probably some of my most favorite martial arts movies I've ever seen, Ip Man 2 in particular. It strikes this nice balance between martial arts action and martial arts philosophy, and it was something that we hadn't really seen before because, at least in my experience and what we got here in the US, we either got the really artistic wushu films like, well, Hero by Zhang Yimou, or we got the really intense action film like, well, check your local dollar store bargain bin and you'd find a whole bunch of them. I have a whole bunch of them on my shelf right here. So that's why I really like the Ip Man movies, because it also gives us some insight into some very latent emotions in regards to the scars left by Japanese occupation and some of the wounds left as a result of British imperialism. And nothing exemplifies this more when you look at the conflicts of the first two Ip Man films. The first Ip Man film focuses on a conflict that's more about like hard versus soft, a very hard, fierce martial art that is Japanese karate, versus the softer, although it's like soft but still kind of hard, kind of the be like water sort of philosophy of Wing Chun. And then in the second film, it was very much a conflict about honor amongst martial artists in the face of British imperialism, as exemplified by Ip Man fighting this obnoxious British boxer by the name of Twister. With this film, I get the feeling the series is starting to lose its way a little bit. I mention this because it feels like this film is a bit of a retread, like there are scenes and ideas that were worked into this film for the sake of trying to be similar to the previous two films. For example, I get that Ip Man trained Bruce Lee, but honestly, you didn't need to try to shoehorn him into this film because the scenes of him they do put in don't really add all that much to the story as a whole. I mean, yeah, the opening scene with the cigarettes and the water looked cool, but really, it didn't add to the story. Speaking of which, we're given three major plotlines in this film, but two of them feel kind of half-formed. It's kind of reminiscent of the first Ip Man film, except it feels like it's done in reverse, because in the first Ip Man film, you had the rivalry between the Hyungkyuan school and Ip Man in the first half of the film, and then the second half was dealing with Japanese occupation. But here, you've got the larger threat first, that of a criminal organization led by, well, an American real estate developer trying to evict people from a school, and then the second half is about the martial arts rivalry. It feels kind of backwards and just there was no cohesiveness to the way those two plot lines were told. In regards to the martial arts rivalry, I like how they introduced the character of, I have to read this and I apologize in advance, I am not good with Chinese, so I'm going to try my best, but with how they introduced Chung Tin-chi, I like how they introduced him as a character. I like the slow build-up they gave him and kind of establishing the sense of resentment he would have towards Ip Man because they're both Wing Chun practitioners, yet he's the one that's all famous. I like how they built that up. But what's supposed to be the payoff just feels like it come out of left field. Like, it feels like a very abrupt, like, face-heel turn of him suddenly being the bad guy. The build-up was good, but then when we're supposed to see him as kind of this big rival, this big villain, it just didn't feel natural. It felt like we got a completely different character from what we saw throughout most of the first half of the film. As for Mike Tyson's scenes, well, let me make one thing clear. He's only in this film for 2 scenes, which is why he's billed as a special appearance and not billed as a star. And I gotta say it, Tyson can't really act. And in this one, you can tell he's not used to doing action for a camera. He's not used to having to do a full-on fight scene for film. And you'd think, oh, but he's a boxer. Yeah, but fighting in an actual ring in an actual fight is different from fighting for the camera. And and that inexperience really comes across because the whole sequence with Ip Man fighting the American boxer named Frank, it's just not that impressive. It does not look that good. And really, that inexperience is kind of what ruined it for me because it lacked, at least in Tyson's movement, it lacked that finesse needed to elevate it above just fancy flailing. And, well, the best way I can describe it is that the way Tyson's choreography works It's kind of like you're playing a fighting game against someone who's really inexperienced, but they know just how to input that one really, really devastating special move, and so they spam it over and over and over again. That's kind of how I would describe Mike Tyson's choreography, is that he's just reusing the same move over and over and over again. And yeah, I get it, it's boxing. It's not really more about, I mean, with punching, there's like a few different ways, but they didn't even make the footwork seem that impressive. And again, it speaks to the inexperience of Tyson doing any sort of action for film. And when you think about it from a story perspective, there's no real sense of build-up. I mean, they try to build it up. They try to build it as leading to this, as the end of this huge conflict that takes up most of the first half of the film. But it's just underwhelming because we're supposed to see this fight scene and then it just ends. That whole storyline that we've been following just stops. Now, the strongest plotline in this film is where we're exploring Yip Man's relationship with his wife. Now, I don't want to give anything away, but it really devotes a good chunk of the film to Ip Man trying to basically make up for lost time, because if you've seen the previous two films, his wife, more or less, is neglected. And, well, in this film, he kind of realizes how much of a jerk he's been, and so he's basically trying to make up for a lot of lost time. And, well, it's very poignant, it's very emotional, very touching, and it shows us more of the man rather than just the martial artist. And, well, it was the strongest plotline. It basically had the most to say, so to speak. But that leads to another problem with this film. It's pathos. I mean, with the previous two films, the various messages that the films are trying to get across were naturally complemented by the action and the imagery we saw in the film as well. But here, it all just feels tacked on like an afterthought. And this is most present during a lot of these moments where Yip Man is giving these long-winded speeches, especially at the end after this big final climactic fight during the second half of the film. It just all felt really forced. It felt like they had planned out the action scenes, but they didn't really have a strong enough theme to tie it all together. And that's the biggest problem I had with this film, is that the pathos, the message, everything they were trying to say just didn't feel natural. It felt forced. When it comes to the action sequences that most people are probably paying to see, it's more of the same fast-paced yet poetic action that we've come to expect, where it's very elaborate stunts, very elaborate choreography, very fast-paced movement. I can't move around too much because I don't want to punch my lights, but it's very much more of the same. And as I mentioned, some sequences are definitely weaker than other sequences in this film, but it delivers on that front. Overall, Ip Man 3 feels like an attempt to replicate past successes, and kind of in the bad way. Like, they had the plot lines drafted, but they didn't really have a strong enough theme to tie it all together. And as such, the drama and the action of the film don't feel very cohesive. They feel very much at odds with one another. I mean, if you're a fan of the franchise like I am, or if you're just a general martial arts movie fan and this is playing in your city, I do recommend seeing it. It's what I would call the weakest of the three Ip Man films. And no, I'm not counting any of the other knockoff films that were rushed into production or put into production around the same time. In regards to the main Wilson Yip Man series, my ranking in descending order would go Ip Man 2, Ip Man 1, and then Ip Man 3. It's definitely the weakest of the three films. We know there's probably going to be more, but it's more of the same. It's just, it feels like they're struggling a little bit, like they're starting to lose kind of an idea of what type of film they want it to be. All of that said, Ip Man 3 gets a 3.5 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.